here we are. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us today is another talented individual whom I had the pleasure of meeting at this past year's, I must say, AnaCon. Now, my guest today is a poet who draws inspiration from the mundane to the mystical, often speculating on love, life, and mental health. He's also a singer and writes speculative fiction and comics under the alias Elle Indigo, and can usually be found trying to create all the things. Her debut book, Blank Canvas, which weaves art through themes of mental health, feminism, and love and heartbreak, is out now. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest making her official debut here on the show, Leanne Kathleen Indigo. Leanne, welcome to the show.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me, Gabriel.
Awesome, Leanne. Well, before we dive into your work, is there anything else you'd like to add about your background to share with our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, I mean, that covers most of it. I had my first full-length comic come out in, I want to say it was 2022 now. Sometimes the years all mesh together a little bit. My first short comic in an anthology came out in 2020, maybe beginning in 2021, right around there. And yeah, I've just been writing probably forever, as long as I could write. Comics were the newest thing for me. Lyrics are my most new thing, so I'm still working on perfecting that.
Awesome. And speaking of comics, do you have any of your work that you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners to get an idea of the stories you like to write about?
Yeah. So most of my comics, I would say, center around speculative fiction, so sci-fi, horror, fantasy. I've worked a lot in the horror genre, primarily kind of PG-13, not too dark and crazy. My first full-length comic, Fangs and Foul Play, has 2 issues right now. So this is issue 1 and issue 2, and try to not get as much glare as possible. And that is about a army colonel who he's fleeing a war, and he's trying to get away from having to do bad things when he stumbles upon Fang, a vampire cat. He becomes enthralled to Fang, and now he has to find human victims to feed to Fang. So, he tried to get away from being forced to do bad things, and now he's being forced to do more. So it's a little bit of a, oh my gosh, I forgot the saying. From the pot to the fire, something like that. That's the wrong saying. Anyways, yeah, so the whole series right now is focusing around his dilemma of how do I get out of this. So in the meantime, while he's stuck, he's basically vowed to find the worst people to feed to this vampire cat, because he figures if he has to do bad things, he may as well do them to bad people.
Awesome. And I actually got a copy of Yours and Interest, and I had a chance to read it several times over.
Okay, nice.
I absolutely love it. It's so darkly comical, because the idea of a vampire cat that's in control and a human is taking orders from the vampire cat. I absolutely love it. And it actually kind of reminds me of a segment from a movie called Tales from, if I remember correctly, Tales from the Dark Side, where a hitman's trying to get rid of a cat, but the cat somehow stays alive. And it's so ridiculous that this cat is the most dangerous thing. But that is incredible, Leanne. So let's talk a little bit more about you, to learn more about your background. So as you just mentioned, writing seems to be, very integral to your being, as well as, of course, writing comics, as well as doing music as well. But I'm curious, what sort of sparked, or rather, who instilled this sense of creativity within you growing up?
Yeah, it was my grandfather would always, when we were at his house, he'd always tell us stories and make up stories. Some of which were a little less made up than I realized as I grew up, because I was like, wait a minute, read some Norse myths, and I was like, didn't Grandpa tell us this story? But he always had his own flavor, and he was never published through a major publisher, but had a couple little books that he published. So he really inspired me to just get out there and create. And yeah, exploring other worlds has always been kind of an interesting thing for me. Even with, I think, the pieces that are more true, each of our worlds is so like unique and individual to ourselves that they are their own worlds.
Absolutely, 100%. Now, I'm very curious, Leanne, what would you consider your aha moment when you realize that you want to take your passion for creativity and build a brand behind it to showcase your work to a wide range of people?
Yeah, so honestly, I think self-publishing has done a lot of good for that. I didn't go to school for writing and didn't start trying to get my writing out there for many years because, you know, I had very much the money mindset of, okay, you got to have a regular job, you got to make the money, yada, yada. And when I first got out of college, there wasn't as many options around self-publishing. So it was a little more difficult to kind of get in. And then that definitely changed sooner than I started getting out there. But you know, I hadn't really thought to go for it at that point. And I think it's just, so for comics, what happened was I came into comics around college when I started reading comics. I hadn't read comics before then. And I always liked the medium, but being somewhat artistic, but not that artistic, I didn't really think like, okay, this is something I can do. And then for whatever reason, I didn't put it together in my brain that, okay, you can hire somebody. And somebody, Russell Nolte, was posting about hiring artists and, you know, writing on works. And I don't know why, that's what made it click for me that I could break into this medium. So I started working on short comics, and that was really, outside of some fanfic, that was really kind of the first thing that I started putting out there.
Awesome. You know, you're probably the second individual I've had on the show that has mentioned Russell Nolte. The first person was Jessica Mason. And I've had a deep dive into Russell Nolte and incredible work he's done and a lot of great advice for creators going into the industry, which I think is awesome. And that's something that we're going to be touching on when we get to the business side of being an independent creator. But before we get to that, let's talk about the first work that you've ever worked on. So what was the first comic or the first story that you worked on?
Yeah, so that was In Cthulhu is Hard to Spell, The Terrible Twos. And it was I want to say 6 or 8 page short comic. And I never want to watch House Hunters again. I'm so bored of that show because I had to watch it for research for that comic. And basically it was the old gods had invaded Earth, and this, you know, relatively normal human couple is trying to find a home in the apocalypse. So I wanted to follow that kind of script similar to the show, and watched a lot of that. So that was my first comic that was published in an anthology.
Awesome. So walk me through it. Once you began, you know, as you said, doing research, planning out the story, what were the goals you had for that first project, as well as the promise making to your future readers? And the reason I ask this question is that, you know, as independent creators or creators in general, sometimes we don't have promises. Sometimes the only promise that we guarantee is that, you know, this is going to be a great story. It's going to be a little bit different. But some have even gone beyond that. We want to, you know, invoke some nostalgia, or we want to, you know, turn the tables on the norm for a genre or a subgenre. So what was it like for you writing that first project?
Yeah, so that was my first time working within the comic script format, and I've definitely evolved since then in the writing and the format there. And I think there's only one comic that I've written that doesn't have like a joke in it. So sorry, excuse me. So I'm always trying to instill like a little bit of humor, especially in the horror stuff, because I just think it lightens the mood and it brings a little bit of fun for the reader.
Nice. That's amazing. Now, curious, the next question, well, rather the lead up to that is, as independent creators, when we embark on this project or a project, sometimes we're very hesitant to share, with our friends and family that we are working on it because, we want it to be a surprise and we want to, get their genuine reaction. So for you, when did you tell your friends and family that you were working on your first comic, and what was their general reaction like?
I don't know that I recall what their reaction was like, but I'm pretty bad at like not telling people when I'm doing something. Like I know there can be some benefit to kind of holding back and waiting and being like, hey, this thing's done. I'm not very good at that. Everybody knows what I'm doing most of the time. If they don't, it's because I just forgot. Namely,
Nice. Awesome. And when you shared it with other people outside of your friends and family, what were the initial feedback like? Was it positive, negative, or somewhere down the middle?
I think it was mostly positive feedback from what I remember. It's a little hard for me to remember that far back. So,
all right, nice.
I haven't gotten any hate mail yet, though.
Well, that's good. That's very good. And that actually kind of leads into the next question, first of several reflective questions, which is, well, context of this question is that, as independent creators, whenever we are working on a new project, there is that hesitancy to, share it outside of our inner group of people because we don't know what, complete strangers are going to think of, especially now in the digital age. And in the digital age, being an independent creator has its benefits as well as its consequences. The benefits are, we're able to meet new people, network, build a team, which is very integral if you're an independent creator, finding an artist, finding, someone to format everything, and even finding a press house or a small indie comic group that, wants to promote your work. That's all the benefits. But the negatives, and rather the drawbacks, is that as independent creators and creators in general, we unfortunately leave ourselves open to a lot of, negativity, hate speech, trolls, and all that can be very detrimental to an author's mental health and overall well-being. And of course, that dreaded imposter syndrome is always going to be there in the back of our minds. So when you began this journey of yours, did you ever have those moments of heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome? And what has disciplined you to continue embarking on new projects throughout your career?
So I think the biggest times that I get the imposter syndrome for me is really on occasionally podcasts, not as much now, more so sometimes if it's a group one, because then I'm like, oh, I'm in this like group with all these people who've been doing it for longer than me, or at conventions. I still sometimes when I'm on a panel at a convention, I'm like, what am I doing here, But the more I do it, it does get easier. And there's a piece of advice that I try to remember, which is that you really only need to be a couple steps above the other people in the room, not above, like a couple steps ahead of the other people in the room, to have something valuable for them to learn from you or to hear from you and your experience. So that really helps me because it's like, okay, I don't actually have to be an expert. And I have done this, so I do have experience and I do have something that I can talk about here. So yeah, that really helps me in that regard. Thankfully, I have not really encountered trolls so much in this space. Hopefully that keeps up, but it's the internet, so.
Yes, that is very true. And before we dive deep into the other questions, I did want to talk a little about your singing too, because in your bio, you're also a singer who goes by another name. So how did that come about?
Yeah, so yeah, singing and writing are my two biggest joys in life, and I just I get the most joy when I'm singing, I think. And I have had stage fright for forever, which is why I really didn't start getting out there until I just started performing last year. A couple years before that, I started going to karaoke like all the time to do my best to get over the stage fright, which I'm still not over, but it's definitely much better now. I can stand up and do it and be fine. I haven't performed in front of like a big stage yet, so I'm sure there's going to be some nerves whenever I get to that point. Yeah, so I mean, I've been taking singing lessons on and off since I was 10, so it's been something I've done for a while. I just didn't think I'd want to pursue it because of the stage fright. And then I just had a moment where I was like, you know what, I love doing this. So if I love doing it that much, I'm going to push myself to do it. And yeah, so I perform under the name Elle Indigo. So it's kind of a mix of my, initials and then my pen name. And yeah, my partner and I just recorded a cover that will hopefully be out probably in a month is going to be my guess.
All right.
And then we've mostly got one original done. It's not quite done yet, but it's getting there. So yeah, the basics are written. Yeah.
So almost just like your writing and like your preferred genres, for your music, do they kind of follow the same themes as your writing, or is it a little bit different?
It's a little bit more along the lines of my poetry for me. It's very personal. A lot of, heartbreak, stuff like that. I'd like to branch out into other topics like on a future album, but that's kind of where this first one's taking me. So
Absolutely. And this actually kind of leads into the next question, which I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on. So background for this question, as I'm sure you have probably seen that within the last 20 years, there's been a surge of independent creators, from musicians, artists, writers, comic creators, and so forth. I mean, it's incredible how many independent creators there are. And I've been asking a lot of guests this question, why is that the case? And a lot of them tend to agree that during the COVID years, the lockdown years, that sort of pushed people out of their comfort zone and, tap into their forgotten passions that they remember having all those years ago. And looking back on that, I definitely would have to agree in a sense that I was around that time when I began my writing. And that has led to a debate that I've been noticing of whether or not, since the COVID years, are we now in a golden age of independent creators? Some have said that we are. Some say we're more in a renaissance. Some say that we're just entering that phase. While others have even gone forward and said that while there is an influx, an increase in independent creators, a lot of the work that is done was not created solely based on passion. It's just there to exist in the void. So, Leanne, what are your thoughts on this discussion? Do you believe that we are in a golden age, or are we just entering that phase now?
Yeah, I guess I'm not quite sure what we would define as a golden age. So in that way, I'm not quite sure. Do you have a definition that you would like to use for that before I continue answering?
I think, at least for me, I think as a broad line for what you consider a golden age or a renaissance, is that there are a lot more independent authors, independent creators, and that is incredible. And that's really great to see. But I will also say that how many are, in the mindset of creating a business and really growing their brand? Yeah. I would consider myself in that category because I'm also trying to build my brand as the Wandering Scribe. So it's a yes and a no for me in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, independent publishing and also, with music, it's much easier now to get out there, and we have more tools available, which is really cool. It still takes a lot to master all of those things, though. So a lot of people can put out a lot of stuff. It could be anywhere from not so great to mediocre to good to like amazing, depending where you are on the scale. And really, when you start out with anything, it's usually not your greatest work, which doesn't make it bad, but the first ones are, and I know that my first ones are not, not that they're bad, just I have better, or I've put out better since then. as I progress. And I think that's kind of a natural path of things. Sorry, I'm like really itchy right now for some reason. I lost train of thought. Yeah. But to cut through the noise, like having a brand and having, or just a personal brand, I think is going to really help people stand out.
Yes.
There will be people who can stand out without doing that, but I think putting that effort and that energy there is always going to help like boost somebody up and get them noticed more. So I think those that are trying to do that are going to have a little bit of a better chance at success. And there's always those, one hits that people just skyrocket, but those are the lucky ones, I think.
And that is 100% true, Leanne. And this kind of leads into the debate even further with, the rise of AI and impacting, for better or for worse, a lot of people would say for worse, the publishing industry and the comic world. Yeah. I don't know if you may have seen in some news or maybe on social media of comic artists using AI tools for their artwork, and even well in the publishing world where some authors have used an AI generator to write their books, and it will actually use a point more recently, the book that had this book was written in the style of so-and-so, and I was like, oh my gosh, no. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I have used AI in the sense of helping, plan out my outlines and my characters, and that's it. I don't use it for anything other than that. The whole story that's written by me. And I have to treat it as a tool because it is a tool. I can't use it as like, the basis of my creativity because it's still a program. It still has to use something to build upon it. So for you, Leanne, what is your take on AI in the creative sphere for comics and writing?
Yeah. So without getting too far into the environmental impact, which is, it is a very large thing that I'm hoping that, and not just for my own use case, but just in general, that they can get on top of. And it seems like that is something that happens with any new technology. There is an increased environmental impact. So hopefully we can really get on top of that soon. Outside of that, I can't talk about some aspects of my day job too much, but I do work for one of my clients is an AI company, and which is about, I think, as much as can say live here. So I do have to use it as a tool,
right?
And because of that, I've become a little bit more familiar with how it can be beneficial as a tool for creative writing and art. I'm not really a fan of it. I think that for some people, for ideation, if somebody wants to use it that way, I don't see necessarily a problem with it, as long as they're being careful with how they use it from there. I have so many ideas that I'm like, I don't have time to create more with AI because I can't keep on top of the ideas I already have.
Right.
But I can see it being a good, generator if you're stuck, especially.
Yes.
I haven't used it this way, but maybe if I was looking at my outline and I wanted to see, are there plot holes here? That could be a good way, maybe. I mean, Grammarly is technically an AI, it has AI editing capabilities, and I definitely am not against using Grammarly to check your spelling and all that. I think that's great.
I use it too.
Yeah, I think that's a great tool. So I think that there can be use cases for it. I'm personally, because of how it was trained, it makes it hard to even say that there's unacceptable use for images. Had it been done in a different way, maybe. And even so, then I would still say, like, this was generated by AI would need to be a disclaimer. But just because of how it was trained, it doesn't feel very ethical to use it in that way.
Absolutely. And that is very, very true, Leanne. And that almost in a way perfectly segues to, the business side of being an author and being a creator. So let's start as a little icebreaker question. So when you finished working on your first project, which was the Cthulhu stories, how much research would you say that you discover that made you really consider going the independent route?
So I mean, at that time, I feel like independent was really my only option.
Mm-hmm.
I know some people in the industry now, but it hasn't led to anything necessarily with any big publishers.
Right.
So, but I feel like I feel like if you have the right connections and people to get into in with, you might be able to. Or I know that for art, I believe, sorry, for artists, that there's some like at the convention, sometimes they'll have it where publishers can look at your works. I don't know that they do that for writers so much. So, and granted, this was a small comic, a short comic for an anthology through an indie publisher. So,
Right.
so in that way, I did find somebody and got in through, in through them. But it's a much easier entry point than, with the big two, or even
Right.
even like the really, really, really big indie companies.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now I'm curious. So from Cthulhu, you also have, of course, Fangs and Foul Play, the Vampire Cat. And I'm very curious, from that first comic to your most current one, did you already have an idea of your audience as well as your readership? And I like asking guests this question because I'm really intrigued to see, where or who do they market towards? Because I'm going to be honest, and I think a lot of people on the show have also agreed, if you're an independent creator, marketing sucks. It is the worst thing, especially if you're on your own. You don't have someone who can manage all the marketing aspects or has people that can do that for you. It is very, very difficult. But going back to the question, did you already have an idea of your audience and your readership?
I could probably do a revisit of my customer avatar. But I did have a general sense, I would say. Yeah, it probably wasn't right when I started making that comic, but kind of a little bit after that, I started really thinking about what I wanted my branding to be and kind of who I wanted to market to. I'm sure I could refine that customer avatar, like I said, because yeah.
All right. And as a little add-on question to that, which do you think is, I don't want to say better because it is subjective,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
which do you think it is probably more, how do I word this, a more personal reaction? Marketing towards your general target audience or marketing to specific readers, i.e. readers just like yourselves who are passionate about the same topics and themes?
Oh, it's definitely more impactful to market to an individual reader. Yeah.
Nice. Now, why do you think as independent creators, and I really like asking this other question, that we are taught that you'll have to market to your target audience, that where the main pool is, but the readership, the individual people, that seems to be where the genuine reaction is, a lot of the hype is. Why do you think a lot of independent creators don't really market towards a specific readership, as opposed to, well, let me say that marketing towards the audience as opposed to marketing towards the readership where there is going to be genuine reactions?
Yeah. And I can't say that I'm perfect at this by any means, but I mean, I think this really comes down to knowledge of marketing and business. And
Right.
so I worked with multiple clients over the years as a executive assistant. I've been working online for like almost 2 decades now, not quite. And so I'm not a marketer, but by working for these different companies, I've picked up things here and there. And so, yeah, I just kind of having that knowledge really helps. And I think any indie, anybody who's putting out their own work and they are their own brand and business could really benefit from just like some basic marketing, even if it's not a course, just doing some research, doing, getting a little bit of self-education online.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, speaking of readership, where would you say your comics and your stories fall under? Would you say they are, well, going into the readership, you have middle grade, YA, new adult, and adult fiction. Which category would you say most aligns with your type of storytelling? And I'm very curious, in the beginning of all of your projects, did they teeter to another readership group?
Mm. I the readership group that I think that I try to target the most would probably be new adult and adult with a little bit of young adult. I try to keep most things PG-13 just so that it opens up a wider readership, so there's more possibilities. But I definitely am marketing more towards like, college age or a little bit older. It's probably like that's where I would like to see most of my readership come from. And I feel like that's probably right around there. I don't have the exact stats, but I feel like that seems to be about the age group. So yeah.
All right, perfect. And apologies, Leanne. Okay, there we go. All good. And I'll make sure to cut that out from the interview.
No worries.
So, all right. So we've talked about, understanding our audience and our readership and whether or not one is the most beneficial. And we just recently talked about, what category, your stories lie under. And this leads to the follow-up, which is, of course, understanding who you are as an independent creator. And the reason I bring this up is that, which I'm sure you'll definitely agree, as writers, as creators, we are inspired by the stories we have read growing up, music we've listened to, the movies we've seen. They have inspired us in one shape or another. And most definitely, even though we don't purposely do it, some element of those stories are going to be woven through our own. But this leads to the discussion of, balancing the two. And I like bringing this up because I'm sure you've definitely heard in a lot of workshops, a lot of conferences, people have said, write the book that you want to write and stuff like that, which is true, which is valid. But there has to be a limit. And what I mean by that is you don't want it to be completely new or completely original because it is going to throw the reader off. And I say that because if you're writing in a specific genre, whether it's horror, fantasy, thriller, readers have an expectation of how certain stories are supposed to go and how certain characters are supposed to act. So again, this comes down to the balancing act of your individuality as the author, as a creator, but also understanding this is the genre that I'm writing in. These are the types of readers who enjoy these stories, and these are the expectations they are looking for. And of course, you're not going to please everybody, but you generally want to get the good balance. So for you, Leanne, how have you been able to balance your individuality as well as understanding the genres that you are writing in?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I put that much thought into it. And I think that some of that just comes from when you've read enough of that genre and the things you like, you kind of have a feel for it a little bit. I actually find when I start trying to follow, so to a degree in my script for Fangs and Foul Play, there is a little bit of an arc. But if I go a little bit too tight on that, it gets a little formulaic, and I feel like you can kind of like see it a little bit. So I do keep it in mind. I guess I should clarify that. I do keep that in mind a little bit.
Right.
But I also feel like there is just some natural rhythm to that that ends up coming out when you've exposed yourself to enough writing.
Absolutely, 100%. As a little fun question, would you consider yourself a panzer or a plotter when it comes to your writing?
More of a plotter. But then I don't always want to keep it too tight either. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I get a little too stuck. Yeah. I think it's good when you do have to consider the page turns in comics, I think it is important to have that plotting. But it was kind of like I had the general flow, and then I wrote it, and then from there I looked at it and went, okay, wait a minute, this isn't going to work on this page. And then you make some edits before you give it to the artist, because a little harder after that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And before we dive even further, let's also talk about Black Canvas, which I'm very interested in talking about. Oh, Blank Canvas. Sorry, Blank Canvas. So what can you tell us about Blank Canvas?
Yeah. So I took this poetry course that was like a poetry publishing course, and then we got a pitch to some publishers, and my book got published with World Stage Press. And so I actually have a couple pieces in there that talk about, that kind of use the comics. What was it? There's this one that talks about like the structure a little bit, and it's actually laid out in 3 sections, which was pencils, inks, and colors, which is kind of how you.
Okay.
So that was kind of fun, but it's a lot about mental health and heartbreak and love and just all sorts of life stuff, because my poetry is very personal. And every single piece relates to art in some way. Even like that wasn't necessarily the main theme of the piece, but there was some like subtle weave through of that. So yeah, it was very
absolutely amazing, Leanne. I've tried dabbled in poetry. There are some poems that I have written, but I would not consider myself a poet. That is a craft in of itself. It is not easy. That's why I just like writing novels and writing short stories. That is my bread and butter. But
yeah, it's what I've been writing the longest. So
yeah,
I'm at a place now where, I mean, I still write stuff sometimes that I'm just like, nope, this isn't going anywhere, you know, but that's just, I feel like that's with anything. When you get to it and you write, sometimes you just got to get stuff out. Not always polished, but just the act of writing helps release that fountain, and then usually something good comes from it. So.
Absolutely. And that's why I've always said that writing is very therapeutic, and it allows us to get our thoughts down on page. And sometimes we'll have those days where we're stuck and we don't know what to write. That's why it's always good to have people in our corner to really give us motivation or give us another avenue. And speaking of people in our corners, what I think is very important to talk about is networking as an independent creator. So, Leanne, this is a 2-part question. When did you realize that, networking was a must-have for your brand as a creator? And are there any specific people you like to give a shout out to who have helped you along the way? And I will let you know, most guests dread the second part because they're always wondering, am I forgetting somebody? Right. They're going to be so mad if I don't mention them.
Yeah, it's funny because on the one hand, it's like, okay, I'm networking, but like I said, it's not like I've been picked up by the big 2. Like nobody's like, oh, come write for us or something. On the other hand, where I feel like networking has been really beneficial is just having people in your corner and having people, who I'm like, when I have another Kickstarter, I know that I can count on them to support me and to, even if they can't contribute to the Kickstarter, I'm like, these people are going to help me market it. They're going to get it out there. They're going to tell people about it. And that's where I think networking is really great. And I mean, you still never know who's going to introduce you to who and what might happen down the line. I just don't like looking at it as like a means to an end of like, oh, somebody's going to introduce me to somebody and then I'm going to make it big. Like, it might happen, but probably not,
It's a 50-50 chance in this industry.
Yeah. So I don't rely on it for that way. It's more like, making friends, making connections, making people making connections, networking with people who, maybe they can give me advice, and who knows where that advice is going to take me. And that's what I think is really valuable.
Absolutely.
So shout outs, Russell Nolte for getting me my first short comic published in Cthulhu's Hard to Spell. My editor, Chuck Pino, it's been so long since I've had to say that out loud. Joel Rodriguez, my letterer, and has been just really helpful throughout the years. Travis Gibb as well. Gibbs. I can't remember if there's an S on the end of his name now. We can look it up later for the show notes. And Abby Butler was my first artist I worked with. So obviously shout out to her as well. And just, my whole team, everybody who worked on Fangs and Foul Play, Alex Gunther and Miriam Yasser, my artist and colorist. And there's been so many people that, I've worked with over the years, but those are some core people I can think of right now.
That's amazing, Leanne. That is incredible. And we now arrive at the final question of this amazing interview. Now, just fair warning, this is a very loaded question, so just brace yourself. Okay, so I've been doing this show now for about 6-7 years now. I've now checking my analytics. I've had 130 something authors on the show, and that includes, traditional, hybrid, indie, and comic writers as well, out of 357 videos, which is crazy. And I've learned so much from all of these people. And the one thing that's really stuck with me is that, in this industry, there is no guarantee that your work is going to be a success. And even within that, there are the two paths: to be an author and to be known as an author. One is a dedicate to the craft, the other is dedicate to the business. Now, they lead to the same end goal, of course, but the second path is the most enticing, especially for those just getting into this industry for the wrong reasons. And as I just said before, there is no guarantee your first work is going to be the start of your legacy. Are there exceptions? Of course. Are those one-hit wonders who are able to make it big? Absolutely. And all the power to them. That's not an easy thing to do. But generally speaking, that's not going to be the case for everybody. And I like doing these shows and asking this question because I think it's important to really discuss, the truths behind, the publishing industry and the comic industry, not to dissuade anybody, no, but to give them more advice of how to best approach it. So here is a little scenario. Let's say you're hosting a workshop about getting into this industry. How would you teach the up-and-comers, the new people getting into this industry, this idea that, well, there is no guarantee your first work is going to be the start of your legacy? It shouldn't be seen as a negative and instead be seen as a learning curve, learning experience to build upon, because you only get better from there because grit transforms into talent.
Yeah. How would I teach that? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I would put it a different way or not, honestly. I think that if you're getting into it with some desire and passion, if you're getting into it for just the business, I think that's really hard. I think you have to have a little bit of passion for it.
Definitely. And even maybe going even personal, let's say you're meeting a fellow creator at a local convention and they're not selling as much, they're not making that connection. How would you console that creator who may be contemplating that, did I make the right decision?
Yeah, that's a hard one for me because I always feel like I could improve my sales technique, honestly. So I'm like, I could do some tips. Yeah. I think it's just, trying not to get discouraged and knowing that every convention is different, every Kickstarter is different, and just to keep learning, because you can always improve not just your technique and your craft, but also like your sales technique, because I know sometimes I could work on that. So yeah, awesome. Learning, just keep learning, honestly, is I think the best thing to do. Yeah. Also, observing what others are doing can help.
Yes.
Like, who do you see who is selling a lot and what are they doing?
Absolutely. And as a little bonus question, I don't ask guests this question a lot, but looking back on your journey thus far, where you're at right now, have you ever thought to yourself how different your life would be if you did not pursue this creative path? If you didn't become the writer and author you are today, how would your life be different?
I'm not sure because I'm still really trying to find more time for creative pursuits, honestly. So it's a little bit of that, like, I still feel like I'm in this kind of middle spot. Yeah. I think that I just would be like, I mean, when I started, I was kind of like, why didn't I start this sooner? So probably that would be the feeling I'd be having now is, why didn't I start this sooner? You know, why didn't I pursue this sooner? Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. And another bonus question, and one I haven't asked guests truly in a long time. With everything you've learned thus far, and again, this theme of, still learning, still honing your craft.
Yeah.
What is your word of wisdom to the viewers out there who may want to get into this industry?
Oh, it's a bit of like, learn what you can, but also kind of just go for it too, because like your first work isn't going to be perfect. Don't research yourself to death. I'm a perfectionist, so that can be a big trap for sure. And yeah, I mean, just keep writing because it's gonna get better. The more you do.
Awesome. Excellent words of wisdom, Leanne. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude this amazing author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Leanne for coming on the show, making her official debut. And hopefully this won't be the last time we see her on the show. Now, Leanne, where can people find you on social media if they want to stay up to date with your work? And where can people buy copies of your Cthulhu series as well as Fangs and Foul Play?
Yeah, I have so many socials. Okay, so at LK Indigo is like me. At Headless Gnomes is my publishing company, and headlessgnomes.com is where you can get all my books and merch. And then for my singing, performing stuff, that's at ellindigo.singer, which is ELLE indigo.singer, and my band is Indigo X Do. But Dio with just Dio, Indigo X Dio, yeah. So all of them.
Awesome.
I try to figure out how to manage them all.
Awesome. Nice. I'll make sure to include all of them below in the description of this video. And where can people buy copies of your comics?
At headlessgnomes.com is my website, which has all the comics. Yeah.
Awesome. So if you want to buy a copy of the Cthulhu series as well as Fangs and Foul Play, make sure to go to that website, which I will be linking down below. Thank everyone for joining us for an amazing author interview this evening. Again, a huge thank you to Leanne for coming on the show. We wish her the very best. And one final add-on, are there any conventions that you're going to be going to, small, local, out of state?
I don't currently have anything lined up at the moment. I have to go check their schedule, but I'm going to potentially try to go to San Diego Comic Fest.
Ooh.
Went there last year and then a few years ago, and they're always a fun little convention in San Diego. And probably I almost always go to LostCon, and it usually just to speak on some panels, which is just a really great small science fiction convention that I love the energy. It's a little bit different from the comic conventions, but there are comic people there as well, and so I love that one. And that's Thanksgiving weekend.
Awesome. I'll also make sure to include those down below as well so you can meet Leanne in person and possibly get an autographed signature of her work. Until then, viewers and listeners, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And remember, this is The Wandering Scribe and The Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you all in the next episode.